to carry out their military duties. It's also responsible for the well-being of trainees and service members in their care who make enormous sacrifices to protect our nation. In scrapping the flu vaccine mandate this spring for all service members, Secretary Hegseth failed to carry out that responsibility, putting our troops in harm's way and undermining our military's readiness. We're at war with Iran and face many threats throughout the globe. A soldier who is sick cannot fight effectively. Being part of the military means making sacrifices for the safety and security of the country. The flu vaccine is a simple way to make sure troops are healthy and prepared to carry out their mission. I want to thank my colleague, Representative Chrissy Houlahan, for her service to the country in the United States Air Force, and now, of course, with us in Congress, and for her leadership as ranking member of the Military Personnel Subcommittee on the House Armed Services Committee. Today, I stand with Representative Houlahan to call on Secretary Hegseth to reinstate the flu vaccine requirement for all service members. Together, we introduced an amendment to the NDAA that would require all service members to get the flu vaccine. The flu outbreak at the Lackland Air Force Base in San Antonio is getting worse. There are now 284 confirmed flu cases and 4 hospitalizations. At Lackland Air Force Base, trainee Keon McDaniel from the 737th Training Support Squadron tragically died on June 16. I'm demanding an investigation into his death in connection to the flu outbreak. In April, Secretary Hegseth called the flu mandate irrational and absurd. What's absurd about keeping those who serve our nation safe? No president or secretary should be able to play politics and put the health of our troops at risk. As y'all know, flu spreads quickly, and many suffer the consequences. It took the Pentagon over a month to approve Lackland's request to reinstate the mandate. In the meantime, many more trainees got sick. Unfortunately, time and again, Republicans in Congress and the administration have shown they're willing to play politics with our troops. Our colleagues in Congress have rejected our common sense call to vaccinate service members from the flu and have failed to include this amendment in the final NDAA rules package. So let me repeat that. Despite this outbreak of flu at Joint Base San Antonio, Lackland, this Congress, the Republican majority, has refused to even allow an amendment to the NDAA to reinstate that flu vaccine mandate. Our nation is at war with Iran and has increased its military presence in the Western Hemisphere. And so it's imperative that we maintain our military readiness and do everything in our power to protect our troops and, of course, protect the public. And we'll continue to push for the Pentagon to fully restore its vaccine mandate and protect lives. So with that, I want to say thank you, and I'll now turn it over to Congresswoman Houlahan.
Thank you. Thank you, Congressman Castro, for your leadership and for your service and for standing up for military members, military families, and civilians and support staff in your district. As a veteran and as the ranking member of the Military Personnel Subcommittee, I know that military readiness is built on discipline, professionalism, and on leaders who make decisions based on evidence and not on ideology. Readiness begins and ends with healthy troops. That's why what is happening in Lackland is so deeply disturbing and troubling. Nearly 300 service members have become ill. Several have been hospitalized. One young American has reportedly died from flu-related causes. Remember, these are young men and women who, by virtue of the fact that they are there, are healthy and fit. These are not just statistics. They are men and women who raised their right hand and volunteered to serve this country. And their leaders, our leaders, owe them better. For decades, the military required influenza vaccines for new recruits because military doctors understood a very simple fact. When thousands of young Americans live, train, eat, and sleep in close quarters, literally close quarters, infectious disease spreads very, very quickly. And that policy protected troops. It protected people like Mr. Cisneros and I when we were young in the military. On April the 21st, Secretary Hegseth abandoned this longstanding policy, not because the science had changed, not because military medicine had changed, but because ideology replaced evidence. And now our service members are literally paying the price, in some cases with their lives. And that is why Congressman Castro and I and Mr. Cisneros have offered an amendment to this year's National Defense Authorization Act, which would restore the influenza vaccination while preserving appropriate medical waivers. Unfortunately, the House Rules Committee has refused to make this amendment in order. And I'll do as Mr. Castro did too. I'm going to reemphasize that. How ridiculous is it that we are standing here literally in the midst of a flu outbreak at one of our most major training bases, and we are turning aside from evidence and from knowledge and from science and denying people these vaccines to keep them healthy and to keep them safe. There is a sacred covenant between this nation. It's a covenant between the people who volunteer to wear this uniform and the people of the country themselves. We ask the people wearing the uniform to risk their literal lives to defend us. And in return, we, the people, and the leadership of the people owe them everything: protection, every resource, every evidence-based decision that will keep them healthy and that will assure that they can come home safely. When our troops volunteer to risk their lives for our country, the very, very, very least we can do is not ask them to risk their lives because their leaders have abandoned decades of science and military medicine. This is about more than one policy. It's about whether military readiness should be guided overall by evidence or by ideology. Our troops deserve leaders who honor that covenant because we owe them nothing less. It is my privilege to be able to introduce Gil Cisneros, Representative Cisneros from California, who also serves on the Armed Services Committee with me, also a veteran as well, Navy, but that's okay. And he also has had the distinct privilege of being in the position of the person who makes these kinds of decisions as the former Assistant Secretary of the Department of Defense, and it's important that it's the last line of defense for military personnel. So it's my privilege to introduce him.
Thank you for that introduction, and thank you, everybody. Good afternoon. I am Congressman Gil Cisneros. I'm here as a Navy veteran, member of the House Armed Services Committee, a member of the Personnel Subcommittee, and also I stand as a former Undersecretary of Defense for Personnel and Readiness. I stand with my Democratic colleagues today to condemn Secretary Hegseth's short-sighted decision to roll back the flu vaccine mandate for our service members. In my previous role at the Department of Defense, I oversaw the Defense Health Agency. I know firsthand why we kept these requirements. Healthcare is part of readiness. Vaccines are part of readiness. They are there to maintain the well-being and healthcare of our service members. You know, Secretary Hegseth is not a doctor, and he should not be deciding what vaccines service members should be required to take. Since the 1940s, every member of the U.S. military has been required to take the flu vaccine, and these mandates should never have been rolled back in the first place. The outbreak at Lackland Air Force Base was entirely preventable, as evidenced by the decades prior with no outbreaks. Now there are almost 300 confirmed flu cases in the military trainees at basic training. That is almost 300 future airmen and women who will not be finishing their training at their expected date. This has completely set back the Air Force's expected recruitment class from entering the future squadrons on time. He must listen to the military professionals. The same professionals that advised me why vaccines were important are the same professionals that are advising the current Undersecretary for PNR and the Secretary of Defense. And it's unfortunate that they are not listening to those professional opinions. That's why I'm proud here today to stand with my colleagues, Congressman Castro and Congresswoman Houlahan, in urging the Department of Defense to revert to their policy back to mandatory vaccinations. Any policy affecting our service members' quality of life should be guided by science, not by fringe theories. Thank you.
All right, thank you all. We'll take a few questions.
From the CBS. I wanted to ask, of the 284 cases and 4 hospitalizations, how many of those are active? How many of the cases are still individuals sick, and how many are hospitalized?
Well, we have occasionally asked for an update from the Air Force for the numbers And that's the number of cases they gave us. So my assumption is that those are active cases.
Then what is the timeline on the exemption to policy? Was it granted before or after the outbreak began?
My understanding is that it was granted afterwards. There was a request that was put in by the base, and it took the DOD, it's my understanding, about a month. We can get you more specifics, but that's what we have.
Last one, have you heard of any other outbreaks, not just at Lackland?
We've been asking that question too, because, where there's smoke, there's fire. This is obviously not the only place in the country that's doing training of this kind. And it's also not the only place in the world where our soldiers and sailors are in close quarters. We haven't any indication of that, but that doesn't mean that we are stopping asking the question, because it's a gaping hole in our vulnerability and our readiness, and it's something that needs to be addressed immediately.
Yeah, that's our ongoing concern, is that you could see more outbreaks at different bases.
I'll do one more.
Sure, yeah.
What is Lackland doing right now to mitigate the cases from spreading?
Well, my understanding is that as much as possible, they've tried to space people out and quarantine where necessary. The base has been pretty forthcoming about how they're handling things, but haven't given us a ton of specifics on exactly what they're doing. But I understand they're doing at least that. And of course, treating the folks medically.
I really want to reemphasize, remember that these are 18 to 20-something young men and women.
Please, yeah.
I'm just reemphasizing, young people are really sick from the flu in a time that's not typically flu season. And many of them have been hospitalized. And these are some of the most strong parts of our population who have succumbed to a disease that they should not have to be exposed to. Also remembering the science of this, there is still ability for people, for whatever reason, medical or otherwise, to decline these vaccines. But when most of us are vaccinated because we're required to, that provides that herd immunity that's really, really important. And so it prevents a lot of us from being sick. And as we mentioned, it also allows a lot of us to get through the training so that we can go onward to the rest of our careers.
The flu vaccine is just one of several vaccines that's required by the military. And they're also the same purpose, right? It's to mitigate. Now, nothing's ever perfect. I mean, you could get the vaccine and you still may get the flu, but or any other disease that you may come forth. But I find it does make a difference, right? And by vaccinating individuals, it does help keep others safe. And like I said, this is part of readiness. And when people are sick and they can't do their job, that affects the readiness of the military. That is part of the reason why the Defense Health Agency is under the supervision of the Undersecretary of Personnel and Readiness, because this is a readiness issue when our people can't do their job. And so the vaccines are part of that, making sure that we can maintain it and keep people healthy and maintain their well-being. And to kind of just ignore the science is just, it's unacceptable, and it's unthinkable, and it's very ignorant.
Any final question? All right, thank you.